following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome to The People's View, a program dedicated to discussing local, state, and national issues and their effect on the American people. The People's View provides a platform for state representatives and national figures to present their viewpoint. Whether it's social, economic, or financial topics, you'll hear it on The People's View.
Hello, good evening. My name is Carl Seidel. I'm host of The People's View. We're doing this program of the Forum on the Board of Education candidates for election coming up next month. We are doing this as a nonpartisan effort. The People's View appears on Channel 96. It's sponsored by the Nashua City Republican Committee, and we have a program that will be shown on Channel 96 all week long, starting on the 28th. With that, I will turn over the program to our moderator, Chris Williams, President of the Chamber of Commerce. Chris?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Carl, very much for the opportunity to be here tonight, moderating a forum with our potential Board of Education members. Several of you will be taking seats here in a couple of weeks. For our audience, my name is Chris Williams. I serve as the president and the president of the Greater Nashua Chamber of Commerce here within Southern New Hampshire. And it's a privilege for me to be here with you guys here tonight. For the audience, just so that we're all on the same page, we have 6 candidates that are here tonight with us vying for 4 seats on the Board of Ed. 4 of the 6 candidates happen to be incumbents currently sitting on that Board of Ed. One is a former Board of Ed member who is vying to return to the board, and then we have another one coming in for the open seat as well. So we have a good mix of experience and views, perspectives here with us tonight, and we hope to give our viewing audience an opportunity to hear from each of these candidates what they share in similar views and where they might differ from each other in terms of the strategic direction for our school district in the years to come. We're going to first hear opening statements from each of the candidates. Each candidate will have 1 minute for an opening statement. We'll go in alphabetical order. We will then go into the questions, and after I pose the question, all candidates will get the same opportunity to answer that question. And we will have 2 minutes worth of responses from each of the candidates. And in the interest of fairness, what I will try to do is, as we go through each question, I'll start with a new candidate speaking first, and we'll rotate right down the line so that everyone gets an opportunity to go first or last as we go through each of these questions. And over the course of 90 minutes, we'll have ourselves a really healthy discussion. Is everyone set? Okay. We're first going to start with Mr. George Farrington for your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you first for inviting us all here tonight. It's nice to have an opportunity to communicate with the citizens of Nashua. My name is George Farrington. I've lived here in Nashua for 35 years. My wife and I have 4 children that have gone through the Nashua school system, and now we're starting the 2nd generation through. I have a granddaughter who's a 1st grader, and 2 more to follow that. I am a retired airline pilot. I had spent 8 years on the Board of Education, but it's been 16 years since I was on the board. I've continued to follow it. Once you've been on the board, I think you get bitten by the education bug, and I've continued to have that interest. And with developments that have occurred in the last few years, a lot of the conversation regarding the Common Core curriculum and what it can or cannot do for the improved education, and the fact that I have a granddaughter, I decided I'd like to get back and get involved in the education system again.
Thank you, Mr. Farrington. We'll now hear from Mr. David Murataki.
Yes, thanks, Chris, and thanks again to People's View to have us here. I am returning, hopefully, for my second term on the board. I was first elected in 2009 and took my seat in 2010. I currently chair the Curriculum and Evaluation Committee, which is really up to our eyeballs in things like the Common Core state standards. The reason I'd like to actually come back is that my wife and I had 4 kids going through the Nashua school systems, and I ended up having to homeschool one of them, my son, because it didn't look like he was going to be passing Algebra 1, which is a graduation requirement in the state. So I have a fair amount of experience with the Nashua schools, having had 4 kids go through it, having had to remediate and to homeschool one of them so that he could graduate. And I'm hoping that you'll return me to this just so that I can continue to my efforts to reform the school system, especially in the science, technology, and engineering and math areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miritaki. We now get to hear from Ms. Dottie Oden.
Hi, thank you for having us. My name's Dottie Oden. I've lived in Nashua for about 30 years. I'm married. I have 2 children that went through the Nashua school system. I'm a retired teacher. I have 24 years of experience. The last 14 were here in Nashua. I am a former Board of Education member. I served from 1992 to 95 with Mr. Farrington, and I'm a strong advocate for children and public education, and I'd like to continue to be an advocate for the kids in Nashua. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oden. Next, we get to hear from Mr. Dennis Ryder.
Good evening. My name, as you just noted, is Dennis Ryder. I've been around here a long time. I came to Nashua first in 1960. I've lived here on and off for probably 40-odd years. So Nashua's my hometown now. I ran first for the board 4 years ago because of the financial crisis that was there at that time. A $3 million shortage. That was my #1 priority when I joined the board. The second was the abysmal scores of our students on the international scale. Our kids are the future of the country, and they were scoring very, very poorly. It was obvious we had to do something about our education. During my term on the board, I've been chair of the Finance and Operations Committee. I'm also on the Policy Committee with Mr. Vaughan here, and I've concentrated mainly on making sure the money is spent well and doing everything in my power to move our kids' teaching and training forward so that they can compete in the future on the international markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ryder. Next, we get to hear from Mr. Tom Vaughn.
Good evening. My name is Tom Vaughn, and I'm running for a 3rd term on the Board of Education. I'm currently the chair of the Policy Committee. I serve with Mr. Ryder, and I co-chair the Budget Committee. I tend to be a bit pragmatic and analytical. I try and understand each issue as it comes up, test whether it would increase student learning, and assess it against our limited resources. Right now, we're in the midst of a major change across multi-years in our standards, our curriculum, and our instruction. And it's a change that I think has the prospect of significantly increasing student learning. I have the experience, I think, to help facilitate this transition, and I think I have the grit to demand evidence that it's working, and I have the background to understand that evidence. I ask that you return me to the Board of Education and let me facilitate this transition and continue to work for you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vaughn. And then finally, rounding out the candidates, we have Ms. Sandra Ziem.
Last but not least, I hope. First, I'd like to thank Carl Seidel for he's a hero for trying to get these things to public attention, and I think that's a good thing. I think this, no matter who wins, this is a healthy dialogue, and it's something we need to do as a city. We need to discuss these issues and thrash them out. So I thank you for that, and I thank you as well, Chris. And this will be, if I win again, my 3rd term. So I've been in office 8 years. Truthfully, it took me 3 or 4 years to get my arms around it. Education there are just so many different subjects that it gets involved with in so many different areas to learn. So I feel like now I finally got my arms around it, and there are still changes that I think we need to make. So, so I hope that you will consider me to vote for me on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ziem. We've now heard from each of the candidates introducing themselves. We'll go into some questions. As a reminder, each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to answer each of these responses. And Mr. Farrington, since you went first for the opening statements, I'm going to start with Mr. Mirataki, who will answer this question first, and then we'll come around to Mr. Farrington ending this first round of questions. All right, so Mr. Mirataki, we're going to start with a fairly general and easy question to get into the questions here this evening. In your opinion, and based on your experience, what is the singular most important issue facing the Board of Ed in the next 4 years, and why?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that the adoption or non-adoption of the Common Core state standards may actually be the, the 800-pound gorilla in the room. In 2010, the New Hampshire State Board of Education adopted the Common Core state standards. There's been no legislative action on it so far. And we have been doing our best in Nashua to prepare for that transition. That transition basically would require us by spring of 2015, which is in the next school year, to actually hold assessments called the Smarter Balance Assessments, SBAs, that will test the degree to which this district has been able to align itself with the Common Core and the SBAs. The problem is that many teachers across the country, and this is also true here in Nashua, while they may favor, and 53% nationally favor the curriculum standards for the reform, over 3/4 nationally of all teachers feel that their classrooms are not aligned, they're not ready for it, neither are their children, and that their districts have not put enough time into preparing adequately for the transition to the Common Core. So there are some good aspects of the Common Core. There are many issues surrounding the Common Core, which teachers, school board members, and parents really question. And these include things like the readiness of the classrooms, the costs involved, and certain privacy issues that are associated with the Common Core's assessment standards. So this is something that I and the Curriculum and Evaluation Committee have been grappling with since 2010, and I think that that's probably one of the things we'll be facing in the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mirataki. Ms. Oden, you have an opportunity to explain to us what you think is the singular most.
I agree with Dr. Mirataki. I believe the Common Core will be the #1 interest in Nashua in the next few years. Some of it has to do with the curriculum. The Common Core is not a curriculum, but it certainly is meant to drive the curriculum. Part of the Common Core has heavy testing. It's expensive, and it really hasn't been piloted. So we're struggling with an awful lot of things in education. In Nashua, we have tried to have curriculum people or people who are filling curriculum jobs write curriculum. Some of these people haven't done it before. They're working harder than ever. They happened to work in my building last year, so I saw the time that they put in. But writing curriculum is a very difficult thing to do. So I think with Dr. Mirataki, the #1 thing coming up in Nashua, the most important thing is Common Core and how we handle it, what we do with it, and to look at the testing very carefully because it's very expensive. And so far, when you look at New York State, 30% more kids failed or did not reach proficiency in the Common Core testing, and there's a lot of questions about the validity of the test. And I think we have to keep our eyes on what's going on and not just accept what's coming down the pike, because everything in education has become top-down. And I think we have to look at our teachers and make sure we get a lot of information from them. I think communication is key, and I would like to make sure that the people in the classroom with the kids working with the curriculum are involved in what we're doing in Nashua.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oden. Mr. Ryder.
Yeah, I agree with the two previous speakers. Common Core is obviously most important thing that's going to be happening in the next 4 years. I think mostly it's a very positive thing. Common Core, if it's going to have problems with it, quite obviously, it's a change. Any change has problems with it. But it's a change that will permit textbooks, for instance, to be written to a standard. All the textbook manufacturers can teach and prepare their textbooks to that one Common Core standard. All the European countries use a national curriculum as a standard. This thing is going forward as far as I'm concerned. It's a momentum, it's a good thing. It's going to have problems, absolutely, and it's going to need careful scrutiny and help. But I think on the whole, Common Core is going to be a very good thing for our children.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Tom Vaughn.
So I guess I'll make it unanimous. I think that Common Core is probably is the key issue, or one of the most important issues. We've heard a lot about it, from a lot of people, honest and concerned. And I've listened to what they have to say, and I'll continue to listen. But to give you an idea where I am on this one, I want to start kind of in the middle. Over the last couple of years, we've made major changes in the way that we do instruction in math, in literacy, that is reading and writing, and in science. Changes which I think will engage our students more, and I think that they have the prospect of really increasing student learning. We have revised our curriculum. We've made it more coherent, more modular, and easier to teach. And we've added a data tool that gives teachers very detailed feedback. 3 times a year, they have very detailed feedback on where their students are, allows them to adapt their teaching to exactly where their students are. All of these things, the changes in instruction, changes in curriculum, and the changes in that tool, the iReady test, are all compatible with Common Core. iReady is an online adaptive assessment, very much like the Smarter Balance. So in a very important sense, I think that we're already ballistic on Common Core. And I don't want to pause, I don't want to go back, because back is a place where 25% of our third graders are not proficient in reading and more in math. And the research shows that if you're not proficient at that point, it becomes increasingly harder for you to gain proficiency. I think we need to move ahead and increase student learning.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Sandra Ziem.
Always the maverick. I guess to some extent I would disagree. Certainly Common Core is part of it, but I think the real issue for me is how we spend our resources. The Nashua District doesn't have sufficient resources to accommodate the needs that we have, in my view. And because 80% of our budget goes to salaries. So the discretionary spending is very marginal and does not allow us to do the things we need to do. In my view, we need people on the board who are willing to make hard decisions, who are willing to go against, they don't go along to get along. That would be me, troublemaker. Because I think that in an honest dialogue, you hear all sides. And in the hearing of all sides, everybody gets stronger. We learn from each other, and we get stronger, and we resolve our issues better. So I think that the way we spend our resources, and I think, to be honest with you, I am especially, one of the few ways that we can control spending, in my view, is when we hire people. Our unaffiliated salaries, for instance, when they come on, we do not currently have a policy that says they will make X dollars. So it's discretionary to some point, and that's one of the few times that we can save money, and we need to save money because I don't think the stakeholders can afford too much more than they're already paying. So, and I say the same things over and over, but it very concerned me that this year we had a teacher with 3 years' experience who went to assistant principal and received over a 60% increase in salary. I don't know too many people getting 60% increases, and I voted against that. So while I think Common Core is part of it, and certainly is the elephant in the room because it is expensive, I also think that the way we spend our resources literally is the most important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Seam. George Farrington.
Well, it turns out it's as difficult to go last as it is to go first. Common Core is clearly a critical aspect of what the district will be dealing with going forward. But I look at it in a slightly different context. I look at it in the larger historical context, and education reform has been an issue that's been discussed for 30 years now. It essentially began back with The Nation at Risk, with the report out of the Department of Education, and that's when we started talking about how our students don't test as well as students from other countries, and what are we going to do about it. And it was followed by Goals 2000, which said all children will come to school ready to learn by the year 2000. And then it was followed by No Child Left Behind, and now we have this program here. I think these programs were all instituted by people who were essentially well-intentioned. I think that each one has offered something. But the year 2000 has come and gone. It's 2013, and we still have children coming to school not ready to learn. And so the reason I wanted to be involved with this discussion on the board is I think we run the risk of saying we've found the answer, that 10 years from now we will be right back here talking about the next program. I think I would like to have some discussion about the idea that one size fits all. We have a very diverse student population here in Nashua. We talk about it a lot, and yet we seem to have a set of standards and curriculum that we think will address the needs of all of them. I think it's well-intentioned. I think it's a continuing refinement. I think it's a step forward, but I think there are a lot of issues that need to be discussed around that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farrington. We'll now move to question 2, and Dottie Oden will get the opportunity to answer this question first. And again, we'll kind of keep it a little generalized here for the beginning. Speaking of the budget for the school district, there have been years past where we found ourselves here in Nashua in a very deep hole in terms of our school budget. And then there have been debates about excess at the end of the year and what to do with that excess in the school budget. Do we give it back to the city? Do we keep it within the district? As a Board of Ed member, philosophically speaking, what is your opinion on budget for the school district and what to do with a shortfall or an excess?
Okay, thank you. This question came up somewhat at the teachers union when they had a forum, and they asked, well, I guess last year $700,000 was returned to the city, and there is a formula. If you give money back the next year, you're going to get that in full. My concern was the teachers were concerned there were books needed in the Common Core their standards. There is more nonfiction reading than fiction reading, and the schools don't have a lot of nonfiction books, especially at the elementary level. And the district wanted to buy some more nonfiction books, and they wanted there was money going back, and the teachers would have liked to have seen books bought for the classroom that were nonfiction that aligned with Common Core for what they needed. I would have voted to spend the money on books. I think books are pretty basic to education. It was part of where the curriculum was going for Nashua. I think there are times, that things come up, and if you need to spend the money, you need to spend the money. There are all kinds of things. When you looked at security, after what happened in Connecticut, we all of a sudden found the money that made the decision we were going to do that. We should have done that earlier. I know teaching at Amherst Street School, we had teachers who were concerned. We'd often have people, try to get through the playground, people we didn't know. And I think it wasn't until something forced us to take action when we did it. And I think sometimes you have to think ahead. And if we have some money to do something critical, we need to spend the money. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oden. Dennis Ryder.
It's a very difficult question to balance budgets when you first start making them. The tendency is there to budget more than you need. And when one budgets more than you need, you're asking the taxpayers to put that money up. If you don't use all of that money, it should go back to the taxpayers. It's not the school district's money. It's the taxpayers' money. I had this discussion with the mayor recently. Budgets are supposedly right on the money, right on the actual amount required, but they're always a little over. And that generates of itself, prudence dictates that you do that. But when the money is finally spent, if there are savings, if there are money sitting there, it should be going back to the taxpayer. That's my personal opinion on this subject. I've had this for many years, this viewpoint. And I think if you look at it in your own planning, if you put out your budget and watch for yourself, and then you finally finish the year with a saving, what do? Do you go out and spend it all, or do you put some of it in the bank? You give it back to yourself. So I think that the excess in any budget primarily belongs to the taxpayer and should go back to that source.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Tom Bond.
Probably should have given half my time to Dennis, who seems to want to go on. I also think this is a complicated problem. I'm going to take a slightly different tact. You mentioned ups and downs, and it's hard enough to actually budget accurately for what we expect to spend and what we need to do. But we are not, we don't put out a budget, just decide on a number and put it out. It's a budget that needs to be really approved by the mayor and approved by the Board of Aldermen. That's the way that the system works. And so what we have is we are also subject to styles, if you will, and to needs that the city as a whole has. And as a consequence, when you do these yearly budgets, if you'd look at them, the chart would look sawtooth, because it sort of goes up and down around some mean, some target. And the reason I'm highlighting this, I'm not criticizing anyone, it's just that we need to find a way, I think, to have our budget have a smoother course, to have a more planned course to our budget. You can't do it for more than 1 year, but we can try and think ahead. There are times when we know that we're going to have to spend a lot of money on curriculum or this or that or the other. In previous years, they would go to the alderman, they would say, listen, we're going to have a big expense, and here's what it is. We'd like to make you aware of this and go with that. And I think that's an important technique that we've gotten away from, and it's one that we could use to smooth that out.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Sandra Ziem.
This has been one of my pet subjects, if you will. I think that our priorities in the city, to some extent, are wrong. I certainly empathize with the taxpayers. I am one, and I don't think we can afford, especially in this climate, to increase our taxes. But I think that because we have a tax cap, we get small increases anyway. And so then when we came into this economic downturn, we didn't even get the tax cap increase. And then if you take from that they want us to give $700,000 of what we did get back, then I say no. I say no, because I think our classrooms are very needy. At Charlotte Avenue, we have 29 in one of the 5th grade classes and 28 in all of the others. And there are people who say, well, there were 40 in my class when I grew up. Yes, but you did not have the diversity that we have. We have, in that class of 28, 29, there'll be 1 or 2 who may not speak English, 1 or 2 who have special education, there'll be 1 who is a genius, there'll be 1 who's 3 grades behind, and there'll be no paraprofessional, because we have reduced our paraprofessionals to only having paraprofessionals for special education. And so our classrooms, 1 teacher meeting all of those needs. Now, that's primarily the elementary that I'm speaking of. But I think that as we look at our classrooms, the needs are great. And I am always reminded of the ad that said, a mind is a terrible thing to waste. These are our children, and I think they should take priority over $5 million sidewalks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ziem. George Farrington.
Yes, I've been through this before on the board 8 times, actually, and you mentioned shortfall versus excess. You always want to avoid the shortfall, clearly. But I think that people need to understand that when these budgets are finalized by the Board of Education, the time interval between the finalization at the board level and finding out what you are going to have left over as a surplus is 15 or 16 months. And so that's a long time away, and in a budget the size of the school district's budget, $700,000, although it's a lot to us individually, it's not a huge number. Then you get to the situation where you're dealing with not just the district, but you're also having to consider, because you have to go through the process of the mayor and the Board of Aldermen, who are looking at not only education, but they're also looking at tax rates, increases in tax rates, and that sort of thing. And if you find yourself in a situation where, and I was not involved in any of the discussions, but I would speculate that the mayor come out with guidelines in the formulation of the budgets and ask that the district come in at a certain number, and then through negotiations or discussions, perhaps a better term, offered that maybe she could allow a little more in consideration for surplus going back in to offset the tax rate for the following year. So I would think that as a board member, I would have to sit down and say, okay, I can spend $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 here at the end of the year for textbooks or computers or something like that. But if it means that my budget in the next year is going to be cut by that same amount to stay at the same relative tax rate, then that means that when that budget comes back to me, I'm going to have to go back and go through the process and probably cut some teaching positions or something else to get to that smaller number in the year going forward. And so it's a difficult balance, but I can understand why you would have to maybe make those decisions and not spend all that surplus.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farrington. David Maritaki.
Yes, thank you. I agree wholeheartedly with Mr. Ryder's comment, and I also also agree with the comments made by Mr. Vaughn and Mr. Farrington. And it might sound like Chinese water torture, but the thing is, we need to also understand that when the State Board of Education decreed that we would be taking on Common Core state standards, by the spring of 2015, we were going to have to be aligned and testing to those standards. From a strategic budgeting point of view, what we knew was that from a curriculum, textbooks like point of view, that we were going to spike our textbook acquisitions because we were going to replace many of the textbooks before the 7 to 9 year replacement cycle that we usually have for textbooks in Nashua. We were far, far behind in technology. On a 4-step technology rating, Nashua came in on a low step 1. I mean, we're just barely off the ground and onto that first step. For a high-tech town like Nashua to be on the first of a 4-step process was kind of shameful. As I recall, something like 84% of the computers in the school system, and we didn't have enough of them, but of the ones that we had, they were over 8 years old. These are doorstops. They cost more to fix than they cost to replace. And finally, the instructional changes. We're going to be introducing new topics in curriculum that many of our teachers just did not have the knowledge to teach that new content. So professional development was also going to spike, technology costs were going to spike, and curriculum resources were going to spike, all at the same time. So the thing is, at the same time, when you receive $6 million shortfalls every year from the federal government in special education, when the cost of Common Core is not being remediated by the state, despite the fact that they are mandating that we accept them, there are some problems. And so I actually did vote with the majority to return the money.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maritaki. And that concludes that particular question. We'll now move on to our next question, and Dennis Ryder will be the first to respond to this question. A few years ago, it was reported that over 100 students from the Nashua School District had to take remedial classes before entering a program at Nashua Community College. How could this be corrected, and is it being corrected?
That's an interesting question, and it's one of my pursuits in the board. I think it was quite terrible that occurred. And when it did first occur, the district and the college had not really talked about the subject. It caused quite a stir. We talked about it a lot on the board, and the administration took immediate steps to try and do something about this subject. Over the 4 years, they seem to have accomplished a little. Not a lot, a little. Still, most of the students that are going back to school at this point are going into remedial training. That's not it's a stunning endorsement of our teaching system at this point. But there are many causes of this, many roots to the problem, and I think that the school administration currently is identifying each and every one of them and will indeed fix the problem in the near future, so all Nashua grads will be accepted in the school, or at least the vast majority.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Tom Vaughn.
I'm a big believer in measuring results, and this is certainly a result. If our students require remediation when they go to the Nashua Community College, then that's not a good result. So I was quite exercised. I'd actually heard this several years before, and I tried to do something to talk to people. But what I'm beginning to learn is that it's not as simple as saying, okay, here's the result that we had, it was a 6, and we expected it, we wanted a 3, and so we have to do something about it. Because you're talking about two very large organizations interacting, and you're not necessarily getting what I would call a clear signal. When I investigated a little, the test that was being given to, which resulted in remediation, is an adaptive online assessment, which was not something that any of our students were used to. And they were not aware that you could stop the test, go out, relax, come back in, take it. They weren't aware you could take it again. So the other thing is that it's hard for these two organizations to sit down and say, well, what's really happening here? What kind of math is it that people are having a problem with? Because what we hear FERPA and this and that and the other. So I'd like to use it as a good endpoint measure of how we're doing, but I'm not sure how valid it is.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vaughn. Sandra Ziem.
In the 8 years that I have been on this board, to my knowledge, none of the kneecaps have gone up. Most of them have gone down. Having said that, I think that says that we're failing. I mean, if you're doing an A to F, that's a fail to me. And so do I think we're, I think that we have, I think they had a program that was called Follow the Child. And the concept basically was that you met the child where the child was and met their needs. And that's one of the concerns I have about Common Core. We're going to start them, we're going to have a standard for each grade. And the kid is going to start at that standard, the child, the young adult, whether they're ready for it or not. So if the standard is here and they're down here, and you throw them in the water and say swim, guess what? They're going to sink. That's just what they're going to do. We need resources in the classroom to resolve these issues. We have 42% poverty, which is something I didn't mention in the last question. We heard at our last one of the most recent Board of Education meetings anyway, that we have 150 homeless students in Nashua. That means they have no permanent address. That means that these children come in and they don't know where they're going to sleep tonight. Pretty hard to teach a child when they come in that mental framework. Does it require more resources to meet the needs of that child? I don't think there's any question that it does. I think anybody reasonable would assume that it does. And so the TAG program problem that we just had, I think that was another resource issue. We had, at Charlotte Avenue, 5th graders, we have 120. So at 5th grade, they go out, 120 kids. We have 3 monitors, paraprofessionals, who go out and monitor that. That means each one of those paras is responsible for 40 kids. I can't even watch 10, Chris. So I question that we might need some more monitors. And, paraprofessionals, they are the best the best value bang for the buck that we get. Less than $20,000, and those people give, they're wonderful. I can't say enough good about them. So again, I don't think we're doing it, and I think it's because some of the resources are going in the wrong place, and because they go in the wrong place, we just don't have enough money. It's a resource. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ziem. George Farrington.
Yes, I was very troubled when I read the article about the remedial training required for our students. To me, these are the real test results that measure how successful the school district is. The others, of course, everybody likes to quote, and as Mrs. Ziem reports, they aren't particularly stellar either. I think that one of the problems for the district is that the taxpayers, the people who are footing the bill, the people who we might like to get some more additional support for, when they read a report like that, or when they read a report that says only 30% of the high school student, roughly 30% plus or minus a couple, are proficient in mathematics, that doesn't give them much comfort in saying, I think we want to put some more, we want to invest more in a program like this. Additionally, as I recall, at the time that article was written about the community college, there was there were comments made that suggested that there had been a lot of emphasis on reading in the district in those years, perhaps leading up to that, and now we had to move to some emphasis on math. I don't think the district can be a reactive district. I think we need to be proactive. We need to be out in front of these things, not wait until something like this happens and then go back and say, how do we fix it? And in that regard, I think oftentimes to people on the outside and maybe people on the inside, there's a very fine line that sometimes get crossed between an explanation and an excuse as to why some of these things are happening, and we need to move beyond that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farrington. David Miritaki.
Yes, thank you. The problem is actually bigger than what you asked. All across the state of New Hampshire, not just in Nashua School District, students that are graduating from New Hampshire high schools require remediation before they're ready to take on community college level science, technology, math, that kind of thing. But it's also at the four-year universities. The university system of New Hampshire reports the same problem. It extends beyond the college system. If you talk to the plumbers, the electricians, the HVAC guys, the electricians, the folks that have an apprentice, journeyman, master track, these trades also complain that high school graduates, not just from Nashua but statewide, are unable to pass the apprentice test as soon as they get out of high school, which is something that traditionally has been something, the first step is to become apprentice ready and, you know, as a high school graduate. So there's good news and there's bad news in Nashua. The good news is that in response to this, the Board of Education has established new courses like College Ready Math, which was immediately oversubscribed the first year that we offered it. We're looking at other things like apprentice ready programs that will also remediate other post-secondary educational goals for our students. There's bad news. The bad news is that, well, there's good news, bad news. The good news is that our schools determined that the policy to not require young children to memorize math facts was in fact flawed, and so we fixed that. But it'll take years to fix a problem that started from kindergarten to go ahead and move its way and propagate through to the middle schools and the high schools and then eventually to career readiness at the other end. So it's getting better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miritaki. And then finally, Dottie Oden.
Yeah, speaking to teachers at the higher levels as an elementary teacher, many teachers complained about the math. We were using the everyday math program, and we're not the only district. The only people that have concerns about that with the new Common Core coming in, it looks like the district is going to be ready to leave the everyday math behind. I think we have to go to our high school teachers and ask them, get some information for them as to why they're seeing kids that are not graduating from high school with good math skills. I think we have to go to the root of the problem. Also, the economy's been tough. There aren't as many jobs for kids. Kids get to the junior, senior year of high school, they haven't put a lot of effort into math because sometimes math is tough. They don't have a job to go to. Are we looking at kids now that maybe we're going to go into the workforce and all of a sudden have decided there's no work out there, I better go to school? If you look around the country, colleges are now sending recruiters out. I was reading an article about the University of Maine in I believe 2008 to 2012. Those students asking for admission dropped by 8%. Colleges are looking for kids, and I just wonder if maybe some colleges are lowering their standards and taking students that they didn't in the past because they need students to fill up the classroom. I don't think that's a large percentage, but I think that ought to be looked at. I don't think you can overlook that issue.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oden. That concludes that round of questions. We'll now move to Mr. Tom Vaughn to answer the next question first. Let's talk about charter schools a little bit here in Nashua. We've had one, the Academy of Science and Design, that's been open and operating in Nashua or the Nashua area now for a good several years plus. We have movements toward another one opening here in the city. Philosophically, what should be the balance and relationship between a public school district and charter schools?
That's a great question, one that I'm not going to be able to answer in 2 minutes, but it is a great question. And I think, to answer the last part first, I think that the relationship, whether you're working for a charter school or whether you're working for the district, you want to have kids, you want to provide an education to kids. And I think that there needs to be a positive relationship between the district and charters and the district. This is the same underlying goal. The more important and more interesting issue, I think, is what balance is there? Should we have all charter schools? Should we have just the district? Should we have something in between? And in New Hampshire, one of the things that the state has decided is we will have a variety of different forms of education. We will have school districts, we will have charter schools, we will have homeschool, and I may have forgotten some other options that are there. I think that is terrific. I think that charter schools provide an environment for some of our very bright students. They also provide an environment for some of our students who were not compatible, just didn't feel like they fit into the school district. I think that is a way of providing an education for kids, and that's what I'm about.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Sandra Ziem.
It's an interesting question because when I look at private and public, the public school ends up with most of your at-risk students. And those are the more expensive because they require more services, if you will. And it makes it hard, I think, to compare one to the other. Having said that, I think that choice, free enterprise, is a good, healthy thing. And I'm very much in favor of making those options available. The other interesting thing that was available that Tom didn't touch on, but I think it might have been one of the things somewhere in the back of his mind, is with the DINI, the Districts in Need of Improvement, under that program, if your child was in that school, you could say, all right, this school is not making the grade. I'm going to send my child to the other school. I'm going to take them out of one and put it at another, within Nashua, I'm saying. And there are people who didn't like that. But I think it was trying to get at the same issue that charter schools is trying to get at, and that is choice. That is, if you're going to a school and it's not making the grade for your child, then what are my options? And currently there aren't a lot of them. And I do think that sometimes they need an alternate road. And so providing that alternate road, I think, is a good, healthy thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ziem. George Farrington.
I pretty much agree with what they said. I don't have any problem with charter schools. I think there is a place for them. I think that if it identifies a need for a child or for a family, excuse me, that if you have a child that has particularly strong interests or strengths in the area of the arts or the sciences, and they can feel that they can more closely work with a charter school that's more focused in a particular area, then I think that's fine. And I think that we should have open communication between the public. I don't think we should just say, well, this helps get our class sizes down, or this frees up a little money for us in the district. I think we should have communication with them and maybe learn from some of the things that they are doing in a different kind of environment than what we have in the public school system. The only potential problem is, as I believe Mrs. Ziem touched on, is the comparison. And we have to be careful that we don't get caught up in this thing that says we have this group of children who have very specialized interests and they are scoring better on their tests than what we have in our much more diversified group of interests in our public schools. But beyond that, I think there is definitely a place for charter schools.
Thank you, Mr. Farrington. David Murataki.
Yes, thank you, Chris. I've been a statewide proponent for charter schools for some number of years. I think to understand that question, we need to first of all understand that in New Hampshire, we have two generic types of charter schools. One of them is the state-sponsored charter school. Any student from New Hampshire may be sent to a public charter school that is state-sponsored, and without the payment of tuition. Within the state-sponsored charter schools, a number of them are actually specialized. For example, we have state-sponsored charter schools that are oriented towards things like, science and STEM, like the Nashua Academy of Science and Design. We have charter schools that are oriented more towards the arts and the performing arts, like Gate City Charter School, which we're also fortunate to have in the city. We actually have in the state a Montessori charter school. So you can actually, if you're fortunate enough to send your child to a Montessori system, the benefits of that actually come tuition free. Also, very, very important class or subclass of the state charter school is VLAX, the Virtual Learning Academy Charter School, which we take heavy advantage of here in the Nashua School District. We can actually go ahead and send students to, like low-density classes, maybe like, say, Latin 4 or something. We may not have enough teachers or students signed up to actually justify a class, but we can actually go ahead and take advantage of the VLAX system. Finally, we have looked at, within the district, a district-sponsored charter school. I still encourage this district to continue its investigations along that line, but I don't think we had the formula right when we first looked at it a few years ago. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murataki. Dottie Oden.
Yes, the idea of charter schools actually developed from Albert Shanker, who was president of the NEA years ago. My concern with charter schools is they kind of go after a certain student. I wouldn't have a problem so much with charter schools if they took the same number of high poverty students, the same number of ELL students, the same number of intensive needs or special ed students, but they have a pretty vanilla school population in a lot of cases, and they don't have to follow the same standards that public schools do. So they certainly have an advantage there. I was just reading an article the other day, and I think you're probably all familiar with the fact that when they did a research report on the progress of charter schools, only 1 of 6 did better than public schools across the country. They just did another study recently within the last year, and it wasn't much better. If you're going to take the top students and you're going to be able to eliminate your discipline problems, just send them back to the public schools, absolutely you ought to do better. So I have real concerns about the fact that they don't have the same challenges as public schools and they're not held to the same standards as public schools.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oden. And then finally, Dennis Ryder.
Thank you. I agree with you, Mr. Farrington. It's hard to come last. As far as I'm concerned, the charter schools give an opportunity for talented students to learn in a better environment than the normal public school. I'm for charter schools that do that. There are other kinds of charter schools that were included in the study that you mentioned, Miss Oden, and those charter schools are ones that are designed to look after students that are on the other end of the spectrum. They're not doing so well in the public school. So it's rather interesting that the results from those would bring down the overall charter schools because they're including the very talented and the ones that are definitely not very talented. So if you compare the results, I don't think it's right. I think for the kids, it's right. That's what the schools are really for, to educate kids. And I think charter schools on the bright, achieving end of the spectrum are a very successful way to teach.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ryder. We'll now move to the next question, and Sandra Ziem, you'll get the
Take
first.
it easy on us, okay?
You'll get the first opportunity.
Some of us
to
are weaker.
I'd like to touch on bullying in the schools. Many of us have seen stories across the nation on the evening news or read in the papers in the morning about the impact of bullying in schools. Do you see a problem with bullying in our school district, and is there a role for the Board of Ed to play if we do see one?
I think it's a nationwide problem. So yes, I do think and I certainly hear it from parents and students, and so yes, I do. And I think that the tag problem, there may be an element of bullying in that. My understanding is that principal ask the students time and again, no, don't get in the other child's space. Don't, leave the other child alone. And after repeatedly saying that and getting no response that they wanted, she decided to institute this tag thing, no tag. And I was one who supported it because I think that discipline is you have to have discipline if you're going to teach. You have to. And I think our discipline is not as strong as it could be. And so I think that that we have to be diligent about watching for it, and when we see it, we have to deal with it. And I think you can only say don't do that so many times, and then you have to give a penalty. If you have a speeding limit and the cop doesn't stop you and give you a ticket, your foot gets lighter and lighter and you go faster and faster. And I think it's the same thing with our kids. If we don't enforce our discipline, we might as well not have it. So I think we need to toughen up on our discipline. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's my take on it.
Thank you, Ms. Ziem. George Farrington.
Yeah, I think that, excuse me, I think that we can all agree that in our lives we have seen or experienced bullying. It's been around forever. I think that the problem today, it is complicated by the social media. Now, I don't claim to be an expert at social media, but I think that a lot of these cases, these extreme cases that we read about in the newspapers and all, seems like much of it is related to things that have been said about somebody or comments made through the social media, through Facebook or whatnot, and being aware of those things is much more difficult than it is if you're a teacher in the old days, if you will, when you would see bullying in a classroom, bullying on the playground, bullying in other places. So I think it makes it much more difficult, more insidious for us for the students, for adults, I guess, as far as that goes. So it's much more difficult to become aware of, and I think we have to use different tools than perhaps were used in the past to be aware of it. But clearly, we read from time to time in the paper with more frequency than I think we'd like, very serious, severe outcomes from bullying that has gone on in this country, and it's very unfortunate. But it is a very, very difficult thing to deal with, to become aware of, so you can deal with it.
Thank you, Mr. Farrington. David Murataki.
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to basically, give a lead into Mr. Vaughn and Mr. Ryder, who serve in the policy committee. I serve as an alternate in that committee. Excuse me. It's pretty clear, I think, that the front line of defense against both bullying and cyberbullying are the parents and the teachers. And I believe in Nashua, the parents and the teachers do a good job of keeping an eye out for the for incidents of bullying and also of cyberbullying, which basically operates on the internet with things like Facebook, like Mr. Farrington had mentioned. The role of a board is to basically first establish and continue to review the policies against bullying and cyberbullying. And hats off to the policy committee that's led by Mr. Vaughn. The Nashua School District was actually one of the first school districts in the state to pass comprehensive policies in both the areas of bullying and cyberbullying. Second, the role of a board is to basically go ahead and support the parents and the teachers and the building administrators, the principals and the assistant principals, and ultimately the superintendents, to basically go ahead and to back them up when there are, in fact, cases that have been verified of bullying and cyberbullying. And I'm happy to say that the Nashua Board of Education has been extremely supportive in these quasi-judicial hearings that we have as board members when we ultimately hear cases of discipline against students that have been alleged guilty of bullying and cyberbullying in the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maritaki. Dottie Oden.
Bullying's a problem nationally, and it's been a problem for many years. It's nothing new. The new part is what Mr. Farrington mentioned, is the social bullying that often goes on when kids are a little bit older. As Mr. Maritaki said, it's up to the board to set the policy, but it's also up to the board to look at a discipline report. And I don't know how often they get them to see how many cases of bullying are happening in the school. And I think you have to look at a record to see, are we seeing fewer cases because we're addressing the issue, or are we seeing more? Do we need a new policy? Do we need to look at this again? So, I don't have the information, but as a board member, if I'm fortunate enough to get elected to the board, I would want to see a quarterly discipline report. I know when Mr. Farrington and I were on the board 20 years ago, 18 years ago, we had that. We looked at that quarterly, and I think that's real important. That's a good tracking, and you want to have accurate information. You certainly don't want to have six bullying problems in a school and think it's somebody's fault, because you don't want to discourage people from reporting accurately. So I think you have to look at it and say, okay, we need to work with this school or that school to reduce the number of bullying cases, what's happening over there, what program are they using, what strategies are they using to reduce it. So I think we have to look at it very carefully in a supportive fashion for the schools.
Thank you, Ms. Oden.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis Ryder.
Yeah, I don't think there's no doubt whatsoever there is bullying in the schools. There's always been bullying in the schools. It's gone on for hundreds of years. The methods that the Nashua School District is using to detect bullying and report on bullying and define what bullying is, I think are quite well done. I give kudos to Mr. Vaughan here in his pursuit on bullying. He's done a very good job of it, good research. Bullying can be so different. Kids in 8 years old, 9 years old, their bullying consists of pushing and shoving and we're not going to play with you because you're too small, all sorts of bullying like that. As it gets older, you get into the high schools, you've got a 17-and-a-half-year-old, say 6'2", 6'4", weighing a couple of 100 pounds. He can bully some poor little innocent kid that's 5'2" just by standing next to him and overpowering him. So bullying is a very difficult thing to control. I think that some of the investigation on how bullying is going on in the school could be done quite clearly with the use of the cameras that are in the schools. I know it's abhorrent to most people in the United States to have camera recording actions and things, but it does record actual fact and could determine what kind of bullying has occurred and use that as a source to stop the bullying. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. And finally, Tom Vaughn.
So, like the other folks, when I first heard about bullying, I said, well, we always had bullying. And then there was sort of mutter internet. But as you begin to think about the social media and the internet, the difference is that, if I was bullied in elementary school, third grade or something, I'd go to fourth, fifth. Eventually, I'd go to a junior high. In my case, they didn't have middle school, and a completely different environment, and I started new. If I'm bullied and someone puts that into social media, puts it up on the internet, it's there. It doesn't matter whether I go to another school. It doesn't matter whether I go to college. All of that stuff is still there. It follows me. It sticks to you, and there's no way around it. And that's what I think increases the intensity. And we see these terrible cases where students just cannot take it anymore. So in some sense, I think it's a more severe problem. And I should just take the credit, but I won't. The state took a stand on bullying, and they wrote a law which was extremely specific and was extremely well thought out. And we took that and we made it into a policy, which I think we did a pretty good job on, but we started with something that was very well thought out. And I think when this hit, that the district did a very good job. We had high school kids going to the middle school and talking about bullying. I think we need to continue those efforts. And by the way, the policy does require a report periodically on bullying. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vaughn. We'll move on to the next question, and George Farrington, this will come to you for the first response. Ms. Ziem, in her response, referenced the tag, the ban on tag over at Charlotte Avenue. That has received a lot of national attention in the last couple of weeks, and many would say probably not the good kind of national attention that we would like to see in Nashua. There can be, some would say that there could be a tendency to overreact to bullying and go to the extreme and make a school into a nanny state by prohibiting a game like tag. The reaction to that, though, is really what I want to get into rather than the policy of banning it or not. Since that story came out, you saw a situation in which the principal shut down any public comment on it at a PTO meeting, pledging that there would be a public meeting on it the week following. And then, once the public meeting was scheduled and parents thought they would be able to show up, that meeting was abruptly canceled by that same high school principal. There has been no official reaction from the school district since then that I am aware of. Is this a point where the BOE, the Board of Ed, steps in on this sort of a situation? Has the school district handled this situation correctly in the last 2 weeks?
Well, I think that some of it has been handled by the school district. Some of it, it's my understanding that the superintendent's view is these things are handled by the individual principals. It's up to their discretion. They're the closest people to the issue, and he respects their judgment. I think that these are the sorts of things that people want to be heard on. I mean, clearly it's not the kind of publicity that you want going on, not just in your community, but in this day and age, it travels around the world. But I think in a district that in so many other areas prides itself on including having committee meetings, having people on committees to discuss this and that. I believe they had 250 people involved in their strategic plan. When you can't just include people and show an interest in their comments when it's a subject that's comfortable to you. You have to have a full airing, and I think oftentimes in situations like this, you're better off to have that airing, make a final decision and put it behind you rather than to let it linger when in a situation like this where you have an offer of a meeting and then a cancellation of the meeting. It creates an uncertainty and in the community, and the people deserve better than that. I don't know how those decisions were made as far as to have a meeting and then to change the decision. My understanding is that the principal offered to have people to come in individually. That can sometimes be awkward for a lot of people. They feel a little more comfortable when they can come in, not as a gang, but with people with mutual interests and be able to sit down and rather than be in the principal's office, so to speak, on a one-to-one situation. So I think that that is an awkward situation. I'd like to think that these sorts of things could be resolved before, without the entire board getting involved in it, however.
Thank you, Mr. Farrington. David Maritaki.
This incident occurred while I was out of town. I was in San Jose, California, at a conference being sponsored by the National Conference of State Legislators in Wireless, and it went viral on the Associated Press. And so knowing that I was not only a state rep from New Hampshire, but also a member of the Nashua School Board, I was immediately deluged with all kinds of people wanting to know, well, what about this tag thing going on in your city? I didn't have very much information at that time. I did have maybe about a day or two later information coming from the superintendent that was, an overview. So the thing is, I actually ended up backing the administration on this particular issue since I had very little information. It seemed that there were discipline issues involved, and I knew at that point in time that discipline issues were likely unreconciled or unresolved, and it would be inappropriate for me as a board member to make a statement that might possibly inflame things even further. Also, given the intensity of the public eye on this thing, perhaps it was appropriate to delay this thing just to allow certain tensions to blow over. I don't know. All I know is that as a board member, we have not yet been approached by the superintendent as that third level of oversight in a quasi-judicial process. I'm sure that will happen sometime, that the board will be asked to a special discipline hearing where we will go ahead and review the facts of the matter. That hasn't happened yet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Maritaki. Dottie Oden.
Yeah, I guess I look at myself as a parent, and if I had a strong feeling about the tag issue, as some of the parents did there, I'd want to have my voice heard. I understand that the superintendent said it's up to the principal on the recess, the tag policy at recess. But, I have to ask the superintendent, where is he in regards to having parents speak to a principal? I would have thought a PTO meeting or a gathering of this that the principal had set up would have been appropriate. I think parents are owed that in a school system. They're the ones supporting the school system with their tax dollars. They're the ones that have the children in it. I don't know what happened to the meeting, but I think that would have been a good step to hear where they're coming from and let them vent. And I'm sorry that didn't occur. So.
Thank you, Ms. Oden. Dennis Ryder.
Yeah, I was out of the country when this went on, so I came back, well, what's all this tag business? I had no idea. But we have a clearly established factor here that the superintendent is in charge of the school system. He has a clear-cut path of reaction with his principals. It's his decision at this point to discuss the subject with the principal, and if he feels necessary, come to the board with the problem. He hasn't done so. So we really can't comment as board members on this subject. It's in process. It's going through the due process. Personally, I think it was a big fuss over nothing. I really do. A storm in a teacup. Tag's been played forever. Everywhere you go, every country plays tag. It's sort of a natural game. So I think that we've really got a big fuss over nothing. Much ado about nothing, as Shakespeare put it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Tom Vaughn.
I'm going to agree pretty much with what people have already said. I think that the way, in terms of responsibilities, the principal is responsible for the safety, is uniquely responsible for the safety of their students. And the principal, I believe, acted to try and, after a series of incidents, said, well, it seems to be happening in tag. Okay, well, let's not do tag for a while. Now, does that abolish tag forever? I don't think it really does. I don't know, but I don't think it does. Does it solve the problem? And, well, I don't know. But if it did solve the problem, I would expect that the principal would take some further steps. So that's one dimension. But the other dimension of this is that it really struck a chord. And it resonated not only with the PTO there, but with the city, with the national press. It got really big. Now, I don't know that handling the national media is something that we train our principals for. So in the midst of this firestorm, I don't know. I really would be uncomfortable if I were that principal trying to hold a meeting which I knew was going to be on CNN and everything else. So I tend to, Mr. Ryder put it very concisely, it's one of those things that in terms of the issue, I think that we should all take a chill pill. But the other thing is, why are people so interested in this? And I like that. People are interested in this because people are interested in their kids and they're interested in the education for the kids, and that's the right thing too.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Sanders Ziem.
I think it's a two-sided coin. The one side of the coin, I absolutely agree. And sometimes when things happen unexpectedly, you don't have a chance to make a plan, and things happen not in the best pattern that they could have happened because of that. So if there was I can understand where the principal there may have said, I'll have people, you can discuss this at the PTO, and without realizing that she might need input from administration. And then maybe administration said to her, let's give it a little bit of time. I don't know. I don't know what as was said earlier, we have not been brought into that loop. But the part that I'm absolutely sure that I feel is that every parent absolutely has a right to be heard. And one of the, because I sell real estate, many times clients get mad. Things happen they don't like, and they let you know. And that's one of the strengths that real estate has given me. People can, because I know that sometimes you get mad and you say things you don't mean, and so you take it with a grain of salt. You vent, and then you say, all right, let's forgive and make up. Let's get over this. And so, you know, they should definitely have been given the opportunity to state their feelings for the record. No question about that. The other side of that coin, though, my granddaughter got hurt. And it's an unrepairable hurt. She lost hearing as a result of something like that. So the 4 concussions that took place and the several broken bones, those are concernable issues, major issues. And I concern myself with the bullying part of it, because I ask myself, in those 120 kids, do they have 1 or 2 who might be a little bigger than the others and might take it out thinking they're a big shot on the smaller child? So I do think that to some extent you have to have, and especially, you have to have faith in people who are in charge. And in this case, that principal I have absolute faith in. My exposure to her has given me great respect for her. She's a wonderful administrator and loves the kids and is committed to doing the best job she can. So when these things happen, we need to work with each other, communicate, talk. Yes, the communication is critical. But I also think that at some point in time, if kids are doing what, and we don't have enough people to monitor it. I mean, 120 kids with 3 monitors, I think, is insufficient. So it's also another resource issue. Beat that dead horse to death, did we?
Thank you very much, Ms. Thiem. We'll have one final question here for everyone, and this will come back to David Mirataki for the first response. You look at the demographic and population trends that we are seeing here in Nashua. The actual school population, at least recently, seems to have leveled off, yet we are seeing an increase in free and reduced meal students here within the district, and that trend, along with minority population growth, certainly doesn't seem to be reversing itself anytime soon. Strategically speaking, looking out 5 years, 10 years down the road, if these trends continue, what should and could the Board of Education be doing today to be preparing our district for what that means down the road?
Chris, thank you very much for that question. I am a second-generation Japanese American. My first language was actually Japanese. so I'm an English as a second language person. I was also born into a poor family. So the thing is, as an immigrant and also as a person with low socioeconomic status background, I have a lot of sympathy for the immigrant populations here. Mrs. Ziem mentioned 42%. I actually think it's a little bit bigger than that. I think it's 43% students that are eligible for free and reduced lunch, which basically means that their parents are basically at or near the federal poverty level. So we have a poverty problem here in Nashua, and I think that this is something that we as a city need to actually look at. Part of that poverty problem that is also associated with ethnicities. You know, like we have a very large Latino population in the city. We have new refugees that are arriving from South Asian countries, you know, yearly. These new demographic trends, which, by the way, also appear in other cities like Manchester, New Hampshire, bring unique urban poverty and ethnicity-related problems to Nashua. We're a different city than we were when I moved here in 1982. So the thing is, I also hear from our outreach counselors, our Title I outreach counselors, that some of these children come to us from households in which the parents and the grandparents are neither literate nor numerate in their original languages. So these are actually kids that may be coming from an illiterate household. So the city, I believe, and not just the schools, needs to figure out how do we address this fundamental problem of poverty. And I look forward to working with the mayor and the board of aldermen to figure this out should I be returned to the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maritaki. Dottie Oden.
Yeah, looking to the future, I taught at Amherst Street School. We had 80% poverty, free and reduced lunch. We had ELL students. We had some of the new refugees in our ELL program. I think in Nashua, we have to look to connect with other agencies to help these families. I know there's a dental connection that we work in the Title I schools with, where they come in and help us with the kids and their dental problems, and that's a real problem for kids. These kids in poverty will come in sometime and they'll say, oh, I got a toothache, my tooth hurts, and my goodness, you'll look and they'll have a big abscess. It's painful. It's amazing that some of these kids had enough to get up and come to school. They probably needed breakfast. But I think we need to look for ways to partner with agencies within the city to help with some of this. I think our homeschool coordinators need to be a little bit more involved with these people, trying to help them get services rather than just translations a lot of time. And I know Fairgrounds Middle School has a social worker, Scott Jakewith, who has done a tremendous job over there. So maybe we need to look at that in some of these schools, because it is really important, and it's really important to let these parents know how to help their children at school. That's what we're finding. If they can read with them, let the child read to them. Just speaking builds vocabulary, even if it's in their own language. So I think there are ways to improve it, and I think we do have to start looking at it, because I don't see it improving. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oden. Dennis Ryder.
Yeah, I think it's fairly obvious that this condition is going to continue. The economy is definitely getting a little worse as far as sharing the wealth is concerned. The rich are getting very much richer, and the poor are distinctly getting very poorer. They're increasing at a fairly large rate. So we're going to have this problem with us. But it's not the first time this has occurred in America. You had this in the 1900s, when you had people coming, poor people from all over Europe, all speaking different tongues, different languages. And they learnt without any special programs, any help or any government intervention whatsoever. And for a long, long time, they existed as distinct communities, then assimilated into the whole population, producing the America we have today. So these new waves of immigrants and people not speaking English will tend to go away a little bit on their own. They get exposed to television, they're going to get exposed to the language in the school play yard. I think it will help them in the future, but definitely we have to make provisions for this fact that there's going to be this low level of economic basis to start from. These kids are going to be there for a long time to come.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Tom Vaughn.
We usually talk about our students in poverty and our ELL or LEP students in the same thing. I think there may be some separation there, but first, the students are from poverty. It places so many stresses on those students. I mean, if your family is moving, maybe moves multiple times a year because they had an apartment, they had an arrangement, it doesn't work out, they have to find another one. You are either changing schools or you're not sure where you're going to be the next night. Your parents do they have time to help you by reading to you and doing these other things? Maybe they're both out trying to find a job so that they can. There's so many stresses on these families and on these kids that sometimes education is maybe a refuge being at school, but not necessarily their first priority. And we need to make it their first priority. We need to find ways. Just because you're poor doesn't mean you don't have abilities, doesn't mean that you can't grow up and be Albert Einstein, okay? And we have some constructs that help us here. We have Title I schools, which we have high poverty, and they have more resources that we get to help students to provide additional services. What we're seeing in the short term, however, is that we're seeing an influx of students to our non-Title I schools that don't have those resources, and that's a big thing. I'd like to talk briefly about ELL. We do a really good job with our students who are in ELL. They come in and they do not have their tests are very poor. When they come out, their tests are better than our average student. Second of all, we need to get used to the fact that the world is speaking other languages. We should all learn Spanish. And so I think we have the ELL problem, not necessarily our students.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Sandra Ziem.
I'm too old. I'm not going to tackle that mountain. I think of the Democratic Party had a presentation on the immigrants, if you will, the 50, that Nashua got 50 this year. And I think a lot of us are aware that Manchester was getting the bulk of those. Every year they were getting 50-ish. And Mayor Gatsis recently said, folks, let's spread the wealth. We can't take any more. It's my opinion that those 50 now will be coming to Nashua. And I think that's going to be, they have targeted us now. I mean, they as much as said it the night of that meeting. They said we were the perfect town to accept these students. And so that being the case, when I look in the future, I don't think that we're going to see the loss of students that these smaller towns are seeing. Manchester and Nashua are obviously the two large school districts. So I don't think we're going to see any dramatic loss. And I think that we're going to see a greater need for services. I think we are seeing a greater need. I remember Mrs. Oden mentioning that back when they used to get these students, they had a translator who came into the class and helped. We don't get a translator with these kids now. So they're mainstreamed, even though they don't speak a word of English. Again, it goes back to the resources. And unless you have the resources, you're not going to meet the needs. And if you don't meet the needs, it penalizes everybody. Because every time the teacher has to stop for the child who doesn't understand because they don't speak English, that takes time away from the other 25 or 27, 28 in the class. And so I think that we need to look long and hard at our resources, and we need to make difficult decisions, and we need to do more with less, basically, would be my take on it. And so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ziem. George Farrington.
Well, there's so many different aspects to this, it's hard to know where to go, where to start. The educational impact for the young children from these families is huge. For young children coming into the district who do not speak the language or have very limited ability in the language, that means that in all likelihood they're going home at night to parents who are unable to read to them in English. Many cases, these parents have not had a really positive or rewarding experience in school themselves. Because of that, they're reluctant to be involved in school. They aren't as anxious or as willing or eager to come forward and talk to teachers about issues with their children. On the district side or on the city side, there's a limit as to how far we can intrude into people's lives to go into these homes and say, you need to be working on this, you need to be helping with this. When families are living in situations where the entire family is living in a motel room, they have higher priorities in their lives other than whether or not the homework gets done that night. At the same time, I think that some of these neighborhoods, maybe if we look at the school as a focal point, as a center for those neighborhoods, in some of the discussions I've had with teachers and all, at one time I understood that they had a program at Fairgrounds Elementary, I believe, where they helped some of these families get their GEDs, people from those families. Again, as somebody mentioned earlier, coordination of services, trying to identify all the needs and identify as many as we can. We don't want these children to be penalized just because they come from different backgrounds, but it's going to be a fine line for us to walk as we try to address those needs.
Thank you very much. That concludes our questions here for this evening. We started at 7:05, so we're right on time here if we stick to our 1-minute time limit for closing statements. So again, 1 minute for closing statements, and we'll go in reverse alphabetical order, and we'll go with Sandra Ziem for her closing statement.
I'm delighted that we had this tonight. There are obviously some very distinct differences in us, but now the public knows what they are, and I thank you for that. I think that's a service to our community. I don't feel like I've finished the work I came to do on the school board, but it is up to the voters. It's been a challenge. It's been rewarding, but it's also been frustrating. I tell you honestly, there are times when it breaks my heart that we cannot do for the children what we need to do, and we are failing in a great sense, many of these kids, because we don't have the resources. And so I would like to see us put more emphasis on education and do better meeting the needs of these students. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra Ziem. Tom Vaughn.
So first, I'd like to thank you, Chris, for moderating, and I'd like to thank Mr. Seidel for putting this together. A lot of work to get everyone here and to get this thing organized, and thank you very much for doing that. I feel a little similar to the way Sandra expressed it, in that I feel like I've tried very hard to do some things, and it seems like as hard as you run, the rabbit is just a little further ahead of you. And all I can say really is that I want to get back in there and catch the rabbit. And I feel very, very strongly that education is what we need to do for our kids, whether they are speaking another language, whether they're poor, whether they're rich, whatever. The next generation faces challenges that we did not. Okay, I mean, they will face change, and there will be demands on them that were never placed on any other generation. I'd like to do the best I can to help them.
Thank you, Tom Vaughn. Dennis Ryder.
Yeah, I've enjoyed this evening very much. I think all 6 people here would make good Board of Education members. I really do. As far as I'm concerned, I promise, if I'm re-elected, to carry on my interest in looking after the financial affairs of the school district with an eye to the taxpayer, as well as to the education of the children. And I will also do, as I've been doing right through, push for the improvement in our education to the point that we can increase our national score on the international scene. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis Ryder. Dottie Oden.
Yeah, I want to thank you for having this forum tonight. My goals, if I'm on the Board of Education, kids in the classroom, I'm real concerned about our classrooms. I'm concerned about resources. I'm concerned about class sizes. I think we have to look carefully and treat the classroom with the respect it deserves. One of my other goals is communication, and I guess that's why I felt that the parents at Charlotte Avenue should have had a forum to speak out. I think communication's a two-way street, and we always have to remember that. And we do have a responsibility to the taxpayer to spend money wisely. So those are my 3 goals, and I hope I'm able to work on them if I'm elected, or when I'm elected, or if I'm lucky enough to be elected. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dottie Oden. David Murataki.
Yes, thank you, Chris and Carl, for organizing this and bringing us together. I would very much like for the people to return me to the Board of Education. I think I have unfinished work. I think that my background, my PhD in Management of Technological Innovation and my graduate work in Masters of Education work give me a good perspective on what needs to be done. I am told at the state level that I may be the single most frequently seen elected official in areas like the Common Core. I have direct one-on-one relationships with the Commissioner of Education, Virginia Berry, members of the State Department of Education, and members in the state legislature in education. I also have, bills for the 2013 and 2014 years that are education related. If I'm returned to the board, I promise I will continue to do my very best at both the local and the state level to go ahead and address the problems that we have here in the school district. Thank you.
Thank you, David Murataki. And finally, George Farrington.
I, too, would like to thank you for organizing this event. I'd like to thank the candidates. Every time we do this, and we've done it a lot lately, I continue to learn more. I'd like to thank the audience tonight. As I think I've tried to be clear, I have lots of questions that I would like to ask. I have issues I'd like to raise, proposals I'd like to put on the table. The only way I can do that is to get a seat at that table. Education is obviously critically important to the children of Nashua. We need to start to show some successes. I think we need to narrow the focus in the district. I think oftentimes the district tries to do too many things and they don't do it well. I'd like to see the focus narrowed and show some successes, some positive headlines for the district and for the taxpayers. In that regard, I would certainly appreciate to have people voting, but whether you vote for me or for somebody else, please come out on November 5th and vote. Thank you very much, George Farrington.
I'd like to thank myself. I'd like to thank Carl Seidel and the People's View, the local television program that actually organized this event here tonight, and I appreciate the opportunity to help moderate it on their behalf. So, Carl, thanks to you and your team for allowing me to be a part of this here this evening. I certainly learned a lot from each of you here tonight myself. To the viewers, November 5th is the election. And the fortunate thing is that you get to vote for 4 of these candidates. So you've got a really good mix here to choose from. Please choose wisely, and I hope that tonight helped you choose wisely come November 5th. Carl Seidel, I'm going to turn it over to you for a couple final comments.
Thank you very much, Chris, and I'd like to thank everybody for attending and you for serving as moderator. We certainly have an exceptional candidates here that are running for the Board of Education, and only our children will appreciate what you do on the board. I'd like to make sure that everybody who's now going to be seeing this on Comcast Channel 96 tells their friends and neighbors, so that what we do, the objective was to make sure that as many voters as possible had the opportunity to see what the candidates had to offer for them, so that they had a better way of choosing where to place their votes. They have an excellent selection of 6 candidates here, and I'm sure it's going to be hard to decide, but hopefully we provided them with a little bit more information to make the proper decision. And thank you all for attending, and anytime you want to appear on the People's View, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you.
the preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.